Jake Morrison stood at the viewing port of Orbital Station Zenith and watched the stars shimmer against the darkness of space. He had dreamed of this moment his entire life. Humanity had finally been invited to join the Galactic Council after decades of waiting and proving themselves worthy. The station was enormous and stretched for miles in every direction, with docking bays that held ships from dozens of different worlds. Some vessels looked like living creatures with organic hulls that pulsed with bioluminescent light, while others were pure metal constructs that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Jake adjusted his uniform and took a deep breath. This was it. First contact on a scale humanity had never experienced before. Kelly Brooks walked up beside him carrying 2 data pads filled with briefing materials. She was his second in command and had been with him through every step of this journey. Her eyes scanned the alien ships with a mix of wonder and caution. The 2 of them had been chosen to represent Earth because they were calm under pressure and knew how to handle difficult diplomatic situations. Kelly handed Jake one of the data pads and pointed to the schedule. The first official meeting would be a diplomatic meal in the Grand Hall, where all the species would gather to welcome the newest members. It was supposed to be an honor, but Jake felt a knot forming in his stomach. He had read the reports about other species and their customs, but reading about aliens and actually meeting them face to face were 2 very different things. The Grand Hall was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above them and was made of transparent material that showed the cosmos beyond. Long tables stretched across the floor, and each one was designed to accommodate different body types and environmental needs. Some aliens sat on traditional chairs while others floated in containment fields or rested on heated rocks. The air smelled strange and was filled with a mixture of scents that Jake could not identify. His nose wrinkled, but he kept his expression neutral. Kelly stayed close to his side as they made their way to their assigned table. Other aliens turned to watch them with eyes that ranged from familiar to utterly bizarre. Some had multiple eyes, while others seemed to have none at all. One species appeared to be made entirely of crystalline structures that refracted light in rainbow patterns. Jake and Kelly took their seats at a table near the center of the hall. Within moments, they were joined by several alien dignitaries who had been assigned to their section. The first to introduce himself was Commander Xyloth from the Kraxan Empire. He was a massive reptilian creature with silver scales that gleamed under the artificial lighting. His eyes were vertical slits of amber, and his voice came through a translator device that hung around his thick neck. The translator made his words sound mechanical and cold. Xyloth looked down at the 2 humans with an expression that seemed to mix curiosity with something close to disdain. Next came the Vrexian ambassador, whose name was too complex for the human tongue, and came out of the translator as a series of clicks and whistles. The Vrexian was an insectoid being with a gleaming black carapace and multiple limbs that moved with unsettling precision. His mandibles clicked constantly as if he were chewing on invisible food. Other species joined the table and introductions were made, but Jake struggled to remember all the names and titles. There were the Dulcari, who looked like floating jellyfish made of pure energy. There were the Torthan, who resembled upright crabs with thick armor plating. There were dozens more, and each one seemed more alien than the last. As everyone settled in, servants began bringing food to the tables. The meals varied wildly depending on the species. The Kraxans received glowing chunks of what appeared to be radioactive minerals that they crunched between their powerful jaws. The Vrexians were given live prey creatures that squealed as they were consumed. The Dulcari simply absorbed energy directly from specialized feeding stations. Jake watched it all with a mixture of fascination and horror. This was truly a galaxy of infinite diversity. When it came time for the humans to eat, Jake pulled out the meal container he had packed that morning. It was simple and practical and designed to be eaten without making a mess. He opened the lid carefully and revealed a fresh salad with mixed greens and grilled vegetables and a light vinaigrette dressing. Kelly had brought something similar along with a small protein bar for later. Jake picked up his fork and was about to take the first bite when he noticed that every alien at the table had stopped eating. They were all staring at his meal with expressions that he could not quite read. Commander Xyloth leaned forward and his massive head tilted to one side. His translator crackled to life with a sound that might have been laughter. "What is that primitive sustenance?" the Kraxan commander asked. His tone was filled with amusement and something that sounded like pity. The other aliens began to murmur among themselves, and Jake could hear their translator devices overlapping with fragments of conversation. The Vrexian ambassador tapped his claws against the table, and the sound echoed through the hall. "You consume plants?" he asked. His mandibles clicked rapidly as if the very idea was absurd. "Raw vegetation like common animals on our farm worlds." The other aliens joined in with their own sounds of surprise and mockery. The crystalline beings chimed like breaking glass. The floating Dulcari pulsed with colors that their translator identified as expressions of disbelief. Even the normally stoic Torthan seemed to shake with what might have been laughter. Jake felt Kelly tense beside him, but he placed a gentle hand on her arm to keep her calm. He kept his expression neutral and his voice steady as he replied. "We eat many things," he said. "Plants are just one part of our diet." But his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The aliens were too busy exchanging glances and making jokes at the expense of the humans. Commander Xyloth turned to the Vrexian ambassador and spoke loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "No wonder their species took so long to develop space travel," he said. "They lacked the proper nutrition for advanced cognition." The Vrexian clicked his mandibles in agreement. "Indeed," he replied. "How can one expect intelligence from beings who graze on lawn clippings?" The table erupted in various sounds of alien laughter, and Jake felt his jaw clench despite his best efforts to remain diplomatic. For the next hour, the mockery continued. Every few minutes, another alien would make a comment about the herbivores from Sol 3, or joke about humans needing to return to their gardens. They spoke about their own sophisticated diets with pride and superiority. The Kraxans boasted about how only the strongest species could process radioactive materials for sustenance. The Vrexians explained in graphic detail how hunting live prey sharpened their predatory instincts and strategic thinking. The Dulcari claimed that consuming pure energy was the most evolved form of nutrition possible. Each species seemed determined to prove that their way was superior, and that humans were somehow primitive and backwards for eating simple plants. Jake continued to eat his salad slowly and deliberately while maintaining eye contact with anyone who spoke. He refused to show weakness or anger even as the insults piled up around him. Kelly leaned close and whispered urgently. "Should we explain?" she asked. "Should we tell them the truth about Earth and what humans really are?" Jake shook his head slightly and kept his voice low. "Not yet," he replied. "Let them talk and let them think they understand us. The more they underestimate us, the better." Kelly looked confused, but she trusted Jake enough to follow his lead. She nodded and went back to her own meal while the aliens continued their jokes and commentary. The Vrexian ambassador eventually turned his attention back to Jake and spoke in a tone that was clearly meant to be condescending. "Perhaps when your species has evolved further, you will discover more sophisticated forms of nutrition," he said. "Until then, we welcome you to the council, but understand that you may not be ready for some of the more advanced discussions and decisions." Jake simply smiled and nodded. "Thank you for your understanding," he said with perfect politeness. "We look forward to learning from all of you." The mockery did not end with that first meal. Over the next 7 days, Jake and Kelly found themselves the subject of constant jokes and dismissive comments from nearly every alien species on the station. In the hallways, crystalline beings would chime with laughter as the humans passed by. In the conference rooms, Kraxan warriors would make exaggerated chewing motions and pretend to eat invisible leaves. The Vrexian diplomats were the worst of all because they seemed to take genuine pleasure in reminding everyone that humans were nothing more than primitive herbivores who had barely earned their place among the stars. Jake endured it all with quiet dignity, but he could see the frustration building in Kelly and the rest of their small delegation. The other humans who had come along as support staff and security personnel were starting to lose their patience with the constant disrespect. The Galactic Council assigned humans to quarters in the lower levels of the station where the environmental controls were less precise and the accommodations were far from luxurious. Jake did not complain even though he knew this was deliberate. The aliens were testing them and trying to see if humans would fight back or demand better treatment. He understood the game they were playing because humans had done the same thing to each other for thousands of years. When you wanted to know what someone was really made of, you pushed them and watched how they responded. So Jake smiled and thanked the station administrator for the quarters and settled in without protest. Kelly was less understanding, and she paced back and forth in their shared command room like a caged animal. "This is ridiculous," she said. "We came here in good faith, and they treat us like we are nothing." Jake looked up from the datapad he was reading and watched her with calm eyes. They treat us this way because they think we are weak, he said, and right now it serves our purpose to let them believe it. The real insult came during the security briefings. The Galactic Council had invited Earth to join specifically because they needed more member species to help with peacekeeping operations across the galaxy. There were always disputes between systems and conflicts over resources and borders. The Council maintained a military force drawn from all member species, but they were always looking for fresh recruits. Jake had assumed that humans would be included in these discussions and given the opportunity to prove their worth as allies. Instead, the alien commanders excluded the human delegation from every important meeting. When Jake tried to attend a strategy session, he was politely but firmly turned away by a Kraxan guard who informed him that the discussion was for advanced species only. The guard did not even try to hide his contempt as he suggested that Jake might be more comfortable in the botanical gardens where he could be closer to his natural food source. Kelly witnessed this exchange and her face turned red with anger. She wanted to confront the guard, but Jake pulled her away before she could say something that would cause a diplomatic incident. They walked back to their quarters in silence, and once the door closed behind them, Kelly exploded. "How much more of this are we supposed to take?" she demanded. "They act like we are children or pets instead of equals." Jake sat down and rubbed his temples. He was tired and frustrated too, but he knew that losing his temper would only confirm what the aliens already believed about humans. "We take as much as we need to," he said quietly, "until the right moment comes." Kelly stopped pacing and looked at him with confusion. "What right moment?" she asked. "What are you waiting for?" Jake met her eyes and she saw something hard and calculating in his gaze that she had never noticed before. "I'm waiting for them to need us," he said. "Right now they think they are superior in every way, but eventually, they will face a problem they cannot solve. And when that happens, we will show them what humans can really do." That moment came sooner than either of them expected. 3 days later, alarms began blaring throughout the station and all delegates were summoned to an emergency council session. Jake and Kelly rushed to the main chamber along with representatives from dozens of other species. Commander Xyloth stood at the center of the room beside a holographic display that showed a small moon orbiting a distant planet. His translator crackled as he explained the situation. 2 minor species had been fighting over territorial rights to this moon for several months, and the conflict had now escalated to armed occupation. The Galactic Council needed to send a peacekeeping force immediately to prevent the situation from turning into a full-scale war. Volunteers were being requested from all member species to form a reconnaissance team that would assess the situation on the ground and report back. Several species immediately volunteered their warriors. The Kraxan sent forward 3 of their largest soldiers who stood nearly 8 feet tall and were covered in thick armored scales. The Vrexians offered their best scouts who could move silently and track prey across any terrain. The Torthan provided heavy support troops with natural armor plating that could withstand most conventional weapons. As each species presented their candidates, they made sure to emphasize why their people were the best choice for this dangerous mission. The Kraxans talked about their strength and endurance. The Vrexians boasted about their hunting instincts and tactical awareness. The Dulcuri claimed their energy-based existence made them nearly invulnerable to physical damage. No one even looked in the direction of the human delegation. It was as if Jake and Kelly were not even in the room. Jake stood up slowly and his voice cut through the chatter. "The human delegation volunteers for reconnaissance," he said clearly. The chamber fell silent and every alien turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from surprise to outright disbelief. Commander Xyloth clicked his mandibles and his translator produced a sound that might have been a chuckle. "That is very brave of you, Captain Morrison," he said in a tone that suggested he thought it was very stupid instead. "But perhaps you do not understand the nature of this mission. The moon in question has an extremely hostile environment, with toxic atmosphere and dangerous predators and temperatures that fluctuate between extreme heat and cold. It is not a place for species who are accustomed to eating salads in comfortable stations." The other aliens made various sounds of agreement and amusement. The Vrexian ambassador waved one of his many limbs dismissively. "Perhaps the humans would be more useful remaining here, where they can monitor communications," he suggested. "We would not want to risk our newest members on such a dangerous assignment." Jake felt Kelly tense beside him, but he kept his voice steady and professional. "We appreciate your concern," he said. "But humans are more capable than you might think, and we would welcome the opportunity to contribute to this mission in a meaningful way." Commander Xyloth exchanged glances with several other alien commanders, and Jake could see them having a silent conversation through gestures and body language. Finally, Xyloth turned back and nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "If the humans wish to prove themselves, we will not stand in their way, but understand that we cannot guarantee your safety, and if you fail or require rescue, it will reflect poorly on your species standing in the council." Jake nodded once. "We understand the risks," he said. "We will not fail and we will not need rescue." The Kraxan commander showed his teeth in what might have been a smile. "We shall see," he said. "Prepare your team and report to Docking Bay 7 in 1 hour. The mission briefing will take place aboard the transport ship." Kelly followed Jake out of the chamber and grabbed his arm as soon as they were in the corridor. "Are you insane?" she hissed. "That moon sounds like a death trap and they are sending us there hoping we will fail." Jake kept walking toward their quarters. "I know exactly what they are doing," he said. "They want to humiliate us and prove that humans do not belong in the council, but they are making a mistake." Kelly jogged to keep up with his longer stride. "What mistake?" she asked. Jake stopped and turned to face her, and his expression was calm, but his eyes were fierce. "They are assuming that because we eat plants we must be weak," he said. "They think our bodies are soft and our minds are slow, and our instincts are dull, but they have never been to Earth and they have no idea what it takes to survive on a planet like ours." Kelly studied his face and slowly began to understand. "You want them to underestimate us," she said. "You want them to think we are going to fail." Jake smiled grimly. "Exactly," he said. "And when we succeed, when we not only survive but excel on that hostile moon, they will have to reevaluate everything they think they know about humanity. Now go gather the team and make sure everyone understands what we are really doing here. This is not just a reconnaissance mission, and it is our chance to show the galaxy what humans are made of." 1 hour later, Jake and Kelly stood in Docking Bay 7 with a team of 6 other humans. They were all experienced military personnel who had served in various Earth forces before being selected for this diplomatic mission. The team included combat medics and engineers and communications specialists who could handle themselves in hostile situations. They boarded the transport ship along with the alien volunteers and found themselves surrounded by massive Kraxan warriors and sleek Vrexian scouts and heavily armored Torthan soldiers. The aliens barely acknowledged the human presence, and most of them seemed to be taking bets on how quickly the humans would need to be evacuated. Jake ignored the wispy. The transport ship broke through the atmosphere of Kilo 7 and immediately began shaking from the turbulence. Jake gripped the safety harness as the vessel descended through thick clouds that glowed with electrical discharge. Through the viewport, he could see the surface of the moon below, and it looked exactly as hostile as the briefing had described. Jagged rock formations jutted up like broken teeth, and rivers of what appeared to be acid-carved channels through the landscape, and massive storm systems swirled across the horizon. The temperature readings on his helmet display fluctuated wildly between extremes that would kill an unprotected human in seconds. Kelly sat across from him and gave him a thumbs-up signal, even though her face was tense with concentration. The rest of the human team checked their weapons and equipment one final time, while the alien soldiers around them seemed relaxed and almost bored. The Kraxans were too large to show nervousness, and the Vrexians appeared to be meditating or sleeping, and the Torthans simply sat like living boulders. The ship landed, with a heavy thud, and the rear hatch opened to reveal the hellish landscape outside. Commander Xyloth was the first to exit, and his massive form was encased in the environmental suit that looked more like a tank than protective gear. The other aliens followed, and each wore suits designed specifically for their species' biology and needs. The Kraxan suits were heavily armored and reinforced. The Vrexian suits were sleek and covered in sensors. The Torthan barely wore suits at all because their natural armor was already sufficient. Jake led his team down the ramp and felt the gravity hit him immediately. It was heavier than Earth standard, but not unbearable. His suit compensated automatically and adjusted the internal pressure and temperature. The human suits were lighter and more flexible than the alien versions because they had been designed for maximum mobility rather than maximum protection. The aliens had laughed when they saw the human equipment and called it flimsy and inadequate. The mission objective was simple in theory, but difficult in execution. They needed to reach the main settlement where the hostile occupation force had established their base and gather intelligence about their numbers and weapons and intentions. The settlement was approximately 30 kilometers away across terrain that was rated as extremely dangerous. Commander Xyloth divided the combined force into 3 groups, with each group taking a different route to avoid detection. The Kraxans would take the most direct path, using their strength to push through obstacles. The Vrexians would use the high ground and rely on their superior scouting abilities. The humans were assigned the lowest priority route through a valley system that was considered too risky for the more valuable alien troops. Jake accepted the assignment without complaint because he understood exactly what was happening. They were being sent on the path most likely to fail, so that when the humans died or turned back, the aliens could say they had given them a fair chance. The human team moved out, and within minutes they were out of sight of the other groups. The valley was narrow and twisted and filled with sharp rocks that would shred unprotected flesh. Strange plants grew in clusters along the walls and released clouds of spores whenever the team passed too close. Jake's suit sensors identified the spores as highly toxic and capable of causing respiratory failure within minutes. Kelly moved up beside him and spoke through the team communication channel. "The aliens think we cannot handle this," she said. Jake smiled inside his helmet. "Let them think whatever they want," he replied. "We have been in worse places." It was true, and every member of the team had been selected specifically because they had survived hostile environments on Earth. They had trained in deserts and jungles and Arctic wastelands and deep ocean trenches. This moon was dangerous, but it was not beyond human capability. They made good progress for the first hour and moved quickly through the valley while avoiding the obvious hazards. Then the local wildlife made its appearance. Creatures that looked like a cross between reptiles and insects erupted from hidden burrows and attacked with surprising speed. They had razor-sharp claws and mandibles that could tear through metal. The human team responded instantly with practiced efficiency. Jake called out targets and coordinated fire while Kelly covered their flanks. The creatures were fast, but humans were faster when their adrenaline kicked in. Within seconds, the threat was eliminated and the team moved on without stopping. One of the engineers checked the creature corpses quickly and recorded data for later analysis. No one panicked and no one wasted ammunition and no one made unnecessary noise. They moved like they had been doing this their entire lives, because in many ways they had. Meanwhile, the Kraxan team was struggling. The direct route they had chosen was blocked by a massive rock slide that their scanners had failed to detect. Commander Xyloth ordered his warriors to clear the path, but the rocks were unstable and kept shifting under their weight. Their heavy suits made them slow and clumsy. One warrior lost his footing and tumbled down a steep slope before his magnetic boots finally caught hold. It took them 2 hours to cross a distance that should have taken 30 minutes. The Vrexian team was having their own problems on the high ground. The thermal sensors they relied on were useless in this environment because the temperature fluctuations created false readings everywhere. They kept seeing heat signatures that turned out to be natural vents or bioluminescent plants. Their scout leader was forced to rely on visual observation, which was difficult in the low light and constant electrical storms. The human team reached the halfway point ahead of schedule. Jake called for a brief rest, and the team took up defensive positions in a natural alcove that provided cover from above. Kelly checked the mission timeline and shook her head in disbelief. "We are actually doing this," she said. "We are ahead of the aliens, who are supposed to be superior to us in every way." Jake drank water from his suit reservoir and studied the map on his display. "We are doing this because we were built for it," he said. "Every human comes from a long line of survivors who refused to give up no matter how bad things got." Kelly nodded slowly and looked at the rest of the team. They were tired but not exhausted, and alert but not panicked. They looked like soldiers who knew their job and trusted their training. "This is going to change everything," she said quietly. "When we succeed and when the aliens see what we can do, they will never look at us the same way again." The second half of the journey was even more dangerous than the first. The valley opened up into a wide plain that was swept by violent winds carrying abrasive particles that could strip paint from metal. The human team linked together with safety cables and moved in a tight formation to avoid being separated. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and they had to navigate by instruments alone. Jake led them forward step by step while calling out obstacles and hazards. The wind howled around them and tried to knock them off their feet, but they leaned into it and kept moving. One team member stumbled and was caught by 2 others before he could fall. No one was left behind and no one complained. They simply did what needed to be done. Then disaster struck. A massive electrical storm swept across the plain without warning, and lightning bolts thicker than tree trunks slammed into the ground all around them. The electromagnetic pulse knocked out half their equipment and sent several team members to their knees. Jake felt his suit systems flicker and reboot. He forced himself to stay calm and began calling out status checks. Everyone responded, and though some were injured, none were incapacitated. They had lost communication with the other teams and their navigation system was damaged, but they were still alive and still moving. Kelly worked quickly to restore their equipment using spare parts from the repair kit. The team medic treated minor burns and suit breaches. Within 10 minutes, they were ready to continue. Jake made the decision to push forward rather than turn back, because he knew what would happen if they failed now. The aliens would use it as proof that humans were too weak for the Council, and Earth would be demoted to observer status or expelled entirely. They reached the target settlement just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. The human team took up position on a ridge overlooking the enemy base and began recording everything they could see. Jake counted troops and identified weapons and noted defensive positions. Kelly focused her scanner on their communications array and managed to intercept several transmissions. The rest of the team created a detailed map of the entire facility. They worked in silence and with total concentration for nearly an hour. Then Jake noticed movement on the opposite ridge and realized the Kraxan team had finally arrived. Commander Xyloth and his warriors looked exhausted, and their suits were damaged and covered in dirt. The Rexian team appeared shortly after, and they seemed disoriented and frustrated. Both teams had taken longer than expected and accomplished less than planned. The three teams regrouped at a designated extraction point and waited for the transport ship to return. Commander Xyloth approached Jake slowly, and his body language suggested confusion mixed with something that might have been respect. His translator crackled to life. "How did your team arrive first?" he asked. "That route was supposed to be the most difficult, and yet you completed it ahead of schedule with no casualties." Jake removed his helmet. The transport ship was silent on the journey back to Orbital Station Zenith. Commander Xyloth sat across from Jake and stared at him with eyes that held a mixture of confusion and something that looked almost like fear. The other alien warriors whispered among themselves in languages that the translators could not quite capture. Kelly noticed that none of them were making jokes anymore about humans eating plants or being primitive herbivores. The mood had shifted completely from mockery to uncertainty. When the ship docked, every species on the station seemed to know that something significant had happened. Word spread quickly through the corridors and meeting halls that the human team had not only survived the mission to Kalos 7, but had actually outperformed the supposedly superior alien forces. By the time Jake and his team reached their quarters, there were dozens of aliens waiting in the hallways just to catch a glimpse of them. The Galactic Council called an emergency session within hours of their return. Jake was summoned to appear before the full assembly to provide a detailed report on the mission. He walked into the massive chamber with Kelly at his side and found hundreds of alien eyes focused on him with an intensity he had not experienced before. The council members sat in their designated sections, and each species had their own area designed to accommodate their specific needs. The chamber was circular and rose up in tiers like an ancient amphitheater. At the center was a raised platform where speakers could address the entire assembly. Commander Xyloth stood near the platform and gestured for Jake to join him. The Kraxan leader looked different somehow, and the arrogance that had defined him before was gone and replaced by something more genuine. Commander Xyloth activated the holographic display, and images from the mission appeared floating in the air above them. He spoke in his native language and let the translators carry his words to all present. "The reconnaissance mission to Kilo 7 has provided us with valuable intelligence," he began. "But more importantly, it has revealed something about our newest members that we failed to understand." He turned to Jake and made a gesture that might have been an apology. Captain Morrison and his team performed exceptionally well under conditions that would challenge even our most experienced warriors. They moved faster and adapted better, and showed resilience that exceeded our expectations. I ask now that Captain Morrison share with this council the truth about his species and their homeworld, because clearly we have underestimated humanity. Jake stepped forward and felt the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon him. He had prepared for this moment during the flight back and knew exactly what he needed to say. He activated his own datapad and sent new images to the holographic display. The image of Earth appeared above them, and it was beautiful and terrible all at once. Blue oceans covered most of the surface, and green and brown continents were visible through swirling white clouds. It looked peaceful from space, but Jake knew better. "This is Earth," he said, and his voice carried clearly through the translation systems. "Our homeworld and the place where humanity evolved over millions of years. You mocked us for eating plants, so let me explain what that really means and what it says about who we are." The holographic display zoomed in to show different regions of Earth. Mountains that reached into the sky and oceans so deep that sunlight never reached the bottom, and deserts where nothing lived for hundreds of miles and jungles so thick that humans could barely move through them. Jake pointed to each image as he spoke. "Earth is classified as a Category 12 death world," he said. The term caused a ripple of reaction through the chamber. Death worlds were rare and feared throughout the galaxy. They were planets so hostile that most species could not survive there even with advanced technology. The fact that an intelligent species had evolved on one was almost unheard of. Jake continued without pausing. "Our planet has extreme weather patterns that can kill without warning. Hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes and tsunamis. We have diseases that evolve faster than we can cure them. We have predators that see us as food. We have gravity that is higher than most species in this room could tolerate for long periods." Commander Xyloth interrupted, and his translator carried a note of disbelief. "Impossible," he said. "Death worlds do not produce spacefaring civilizations. The species either dies out or never advances beyond primitive tool use. How did humans overcome such obstacles?" Jake smiled grimly. "We overcame them by being stubborn and adaptable and willing to do whatever it took to survive," he said. "We learned to eat plants because when the hunting was bad, we needed another food source. We learned to eat meat because plants alone could not provide enough calories to fuel our large brains. We did not specialize like most species do. We became generalists who could survive in any environment by using any resource available." Kelly stepped forward and added her voice to the explanation. "Humans are persistence hunters," she said. "On Earth, we chased prey animals for days across open plains until they collapsed from exhaustion. We did not have claws or fangs or natural armor, but we had endurance and intelligence and the ability to work together. We learned to make tools and weapons. We learned to control fire. We domesticated wild animals and turned them into partners. We took wolves and made them into dogs who would hunt with us and guard our camps. We took wild grasses and turned them into crops that could feed millions." The holographic display showed images of human history and the progression from simple tools to advanced technology. The aliens watched in fascination as humans moved from caves to cities and from spears to spacecraft. Jake took control of the presentation again. "You called us primitive for eating salads," he said, "but you did not understand what that represents. Those plants we eat are not wild vegetation that we gather randomly. They are crops that we engineered over thousands of years through selective breeding and genetic modification. We did not just adapt to our environment like most species do. We adapted our environment to suit our needs. We terraformed Earth long before we ever left our planet. We turned hostile wilderness into farmland. We built cities in places where nothing should be able to live. We survived ice ages and plagues and natural disasters that would have wiped out weaker species." The Vrexian ambassador raised one of his many limbs to interrupt. "But surely your violent history proves that you are barbaric and dangerous," he said. "We have reviewed your records and seen the wars you fought among yourselves." Jake nodded slowly. "Yes, we fought wars," he admitted. "Terrible wars that killed millions. But those wars also taught us lessons about cooperation and diplomacy. We learned that working together was better than fighting each other. We formed nations and then we formed a unified world government. We did not achieve peace because we were naturally peaceful. We achieved peace because we were smart enough to recognize that our survival depended on it. Every species in this chamber has a history of conflict. The difference is that we learned from ours." The holographic display shifted again to show more details about Earth. Jake pointed to images of various ecosystems. "Our planet is not just dangerous because of natural disasters," he said. "It is dangerous because of the sheer diversity of life. Earth has more species of plants and animals than most worlds you will encounter. We have creatures that live in boiling water and others that survive in frozen wastelands. We have bacteria that can eat plastic and fungi that can dissolve rock. We evolved alongside all of this and learned to use it to our advantage. When you see a human eating a salad, you're looking at someone whose ancestors survived by understanding which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous. That knowledge was passed down through generations and refined through trial and error, and yes, through many deaths." Kelly added more context. "Humans have one of the most versatile digestive systems in the known galaxy," she said. "We can process almost anything organic. We eat plants and meat and fungi and even things that would poison most other species. We learned to cook our food, which breaks down toxins and makes nutrients more accessible. We learned to ferment and preserve food so we could survive when fresh food was not available. We learned to combine different foods to create balanced nutrition. The aliens you see eating salads are the product of millions of years of evolutionary pressure that rewarded adaptability and intelligence over physical strength, Commander. Xyloth stepped forward and his posture had changed completely. He no longer towered over Jake with superiority, but instead stood beside him almost as an equal. "I apologize, Captain Morrison," he said, and his translator carried genuine remorse. "I judged your species by my own narrow standards. I assumed that because Kraxans gain strength from consuming radioactive minerals, that any species with a different diet must be inferior. I see now that I was wrong. Different does not mean lesser. It simply means different." Jake appreciated the apology, but he was not finished with his explanation. He needed to make sure every species in this chamber understood exactly what humanity represented. Jake looked up at the assembled aliens and spoke with quiet intensity. "When you mock humans for eating plants, you reveal your own ignorance," he said. "You reveal that you do not understand the fundamental truth about survival on a death world. Specialization is a luxury that only exists in stable environments. On Earth, nothing was ever stable. The days following the council session brought changes that Jake had not anticipated. The aliens who had mocked humanity now approached him with requests for meetings and cultural exchanges and trade agreements. Species that had dismissed Earth as insignificant now wanted to establish embassies and diplomatic relations. The lower-level quarters that had been assigned to the human delegation were quietly upgraded to some of the finest accommodations on the station. Jake accepted these changes with grace, but made it clear that respect needed to be earned through actions rather than empty gestures. He insisted that any future cooperation would be based on mutual understanding and genuine partnership rather than the patronizing attitudes that had dominated their first days on the station. Commander Xyloth became an unexpected ally. The Kraxan warrior sought out Jake privately and asked if they could speak without the formality of translators and witnesses. They met in one of the observation decks where the stars provided a backdrop to their conversation. Xyloth removed his translator device and spoke in halting but understandable human language that he had been studying since the mission to Kalos 7. "I want to learn more about Earth," he said. "I want to understand what creates a species like yours, not because I think you are a threat, but because I believe we can learn from each other. My people pride themselves on strength, but we have forgotten that true strength comes in many forms. Your team showed courage and intelligence and adaptability on that moon. Those are qualities I want my warriors to develop." Jake appreciated the honesty and agreed to arrange training exercises where human and Kraxan soldiers could work together. Over the following weeks, these joint operations became popular with other species as well. The Vrexians wanted to learn human tracking techniques. The Torthan were interested in human engineering solutions. The Dulcari asked questions about human philosophy and art. What had started as mockery transformed into genuine curiosity. Kelly observed these changes with satisfaction but also caution. She reminded Jake that not all species would accept humanity so readily, and that there would always be those who resented Earth's sudden rise in status. Jake knew she was right, but he also believed that showing strength through cooperation was better than demanding respect through intimidation. The Galactic Council formally approved Earth's full membership during a ceremony that was broadcast across dozens of star systems. Jake stood at the podium wearing his dress uniform and represented his entire species with words he had carefully prepared. He thanked the Council for their acceptance, but also reminded them that humanity expected to be treated as equals rather than curiosities. "We did not come to the stars seeking dominance," he said. "We came seeking connection and knowledge and partnership, but understand that we will not tolerate disrespect or exploitation. We survived a death world by being strong and adaptable and united. Those same qualities will define how we interact with the galactic community. We offer friendship to those who extend it genuinely. We offer cooperation to those who value mutual benefit, and we offer a firm boundary to those who would test our patience." The speech was well received by most species, though Jake noticed a few who seemed less enthusiastic. The galaxy was vast and contained countless civilizations with their own agendas and prejudices. Not everyone would welcome humanity with open arms, but that was acceptable because humans had never expected universal love. They had learned long ago that respect was more valuable than popularity, and that standing firm on principles mattered more than pleasing everyone. Jake concluded his speech with a statement that would be quoted for years to come. "Judge us by our actions rather than your assumptions," he said. "Judge us by what we do rather than what we eat. And if you make the mistake of underestimating us, again remember that humanity's greatest victories have always come when others thought we would fail." Kelly approached Jake after the ceremony and handed him a message that had just arrived from Earth. It was from the president and contained congratulations along with new instructions. Earth wanted to establish a permanent presence on the station and needed Jake to remain as ambassador for at least another year. Kelly would return home to train the next wave of human diplomats and soldiers who would join the galactic community. Jake felt a mixture of pride and exhaustion. The past weeks had been intense and draining, but also rewarding in ways he had not expected. He agreed to stay because he knew the work was far from finished. Building true partnerships would take time and effort and patience. The Vrexian ambassador requested a private meeting, and Jake agreed, despite some hesitation. The insectoid being had been one of the most vocal critics during those early days. They met in a neutral conference room, and the Vrexian began by offering a formal apology that included ritualistic gestures from his culture. "I shamed myself and my people with my behavior," he said through his translator. "I allowed pride to blind me to truth. Your species deserves respect, and I ask that you accept my genuine regret for the pain my words caused." Jake accepted the apology because he understood that admitting fault was difficult for any species, especially one as proud as the Vrexians. He also proposed something unexpected. He suggested a cultural exchange, where humans would teach Vrexians about Earth's agricultural techniques in return for learning about Vrexian biotechnology. The proposal surprised the ambassador, but he agreed enthusiastically. Within days, a team of human farmers and scientists arrived at the station along with seeds and soil samples from Earth. They set up a demonstration garden in one of the unused sections and invited aliens from all species to observe. The garden became one of the most popular attractions on the station. Aliens who had never seen living plants outside of their native worlds watched in fascination as humans cultivated vegetables and fruits and grains. They asked endless questions about pollination and irrigation and crop rotation. Some even asked if they could try growing their own plants. The humans were happy to teach, and the gardens multiplied across the station. Jake often visited the gardens during his free time. There was something peaceful about being surrounded by growing things, even in the artificial environment of a space station. One afternoon, he found Kelly there tending to a small plot of tomatoes she had planted before her scheduled departure. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Remember when they mocked you for eating salad?" she said. "Now half the station wants to learn how to grow their own food." Jake knelt beside her and examined the young plants. "It is funny how things change," he said. "They thought our diet made us weak, but it actually showed our greatest strength. We can take something simple like a seed and turn it into sustenance. We can look at bare soil and see potential. That is what it means to be human." Kelly stood and brushed dirt from her hands. "I am going to miss this," she said. "I am going to miss being part of history." Jake stood as well and put a hand on her shoulder. "You will always be part of this," he said. "Every human who comes after us will build on what we started here. You are going home to train the next generation, and that is just as important as staying." Kelly nodded, but her eyes were bright with emotion. "Just promise me something," she said. "Promise me you will not let them forget what we taught them. Promise me you will keep pushing back against prejudice and ignorance." Jake made that promise, knowing he would keep it no matter what challenges lay ahead. The final scene took place in the observation deck, where Jake often went to think. He sat alone with a meal container in his lap and watched ships come and go from the docking bays. His lunch today was simple and consisted of mixed greens and grilled chicken and fresh vegetables from the station gardens. It was the same kind of meal that had sparked mockery weeks ago, but now it represented something different. It represented human resilience and adaptability, and the wisdom to learn from the world around them. A young alien approached hesitantly and asked if he could sit nearby. Jake recognized him as a student from one of the species that had recently joined the council. The young alien had brought his own meal, which appeared to be some kind of synthesized protein cube. The student gestured to Jake's food. "Is it true that humans can eat almost anything?" he asked. Jake smiled and nodded. "We can eat most organic matter as long as it is not toxic," he said. "Our ancestors learned through trial and error what was safe and what was dangerous." The student looked at his own meal with something like disappointment. "My species only eats one type of food," he said. "We have always done it this way, and never questioned if there might be other options. Jake offered the student a small piece of lettuce. "Maybe it is time to start questioning," he said. The student accepted the lettuce nervously and tasted it carefully. His expression showed surprise and then curiosity. "It is strange but not unpleasant," he said. "Could you teach me more about human food?" Jake spent the next hour talking with the young alien about Earth's cuisines and agricultural practices, and the philosophy behind human eating habits. He explained how food was not just fuel for humans but also culture and art and connection. He talked about family meals and restaurants and the way humans used food to celebrate and mourn and bring people together. The student listened with rapt attention and asked intelligent questions. When they finally parted ways, the young alien thanked Jake and said